Hello and welcome to this episode of the Fortnightly Dispatch, brought to you by the Baker Street Irregulars. I'm Steve Doyle and I'm your host. You know, one of my goals of this podcast is to introduce our viewers to topics and subject matter and people that I think think they would be interested in learning more about. And today's guest does a bit of that on all counts. Today we're welcoming Monica Schmidt to the show. Monica is a Sherlockian who's been very prominent in the use and promotion of technology to bring people together and during this past year hold together our Sherlockian community. But she has a lot of other interesting things to say as well. So without any further ado, it's my great pleasure to bring my friend Monica Schmidt to the show today. Hello, Monica. Welcome to the show. I'm very happy to have you here today.
I'm pleased to be here as well. Thank you for having me, Steve.
Pleasure's mine. So I like to start with the way I do with just about everybody is, Monica, where are you coming to us from today?
I'm beaming from my home office. I live halfway between Cedar Rapids and Iowa City, Iowa. So I live kind of out in the country in the middle of nowhere. But as far as Iowa goes, I live pretty close to civilization. So it's pretty nice. I've got a nice college town to the south and a slightly more industrial manufacturing town to the north. And a lot of country and a lot of quiet in between.
Well, I think Iowa's gorgeous. I have family in Iowa, and yeah, it's wonderful. So
oh yeah,
that's great.
We don't want to tell too many people how wonderful it is because we don't want the influx of people to be here.
Right.
So keep it a secret.
Right. I get it. So well, let's talk about you. One of the things, as I mentioned in the introduction, is I like to use this podcast to not only talk to friends, but also talk to people, introduce people to individuals who I think are interesting and they should know more about. So let's start there. So Monica, you are a member of the Baker Street Irregulars.
Yes. Class of 2019.
Right. Yeah. Ooh, that was the last year before the pandemic, right?
No, the year before. So I had one dinner that I got to enjoy in person as a member of the Baker Street Irregulars before the pandemic.
That's good. So, but let's back up. How did you find Sherlock Holmes? When did you,
oh boy,
as I always put it, fall under the spell of Sherlock Holmes?
Everybody has a Sherlockian origin story. Well, mine is I think it's kind of interesting. It's fairly reflective, I think, of someone of my generation. I was born in the 80s, and so a lot of my Sherlockian early exposure was media-based. When I was a kid, it was January 1987, and I don't remember much because I was a wee lass of 5. But my mother was watching a movie on television, and I remember this guy wearing the funny hat and having a pipe and talking in a funny accent. And the image just kind of stuck with me. And of course, being 5, and it's a broadcast television show or a TV movie. It was The Return of Sherlock Holmes with Michael Pennington.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yeah, my mother made me go to bed, and I never got to finish watching the movie. And for years, that image stuck with me. And I remembered, the image, but I couldn't quite describe it. I went to the library the next day. They all thought I was a completely nuts kindergartner talking about this guy wearing this funny hat on this movie. So flash forward a couple of years later, I'm perusing the bookshelves of my brother's bedroom, and I actually keep it very close by, but I ended up coming across this little children's abridged adaptation, The Mysteries of Sherlock Holmes, which has the nice kid-friendly versions of the Red-Headed League, the Blue Carbuncle, and the Speckled Band. And we can even see that I stole it from my brother's bookshelf. But
It's great that you still have that, by the way.
oh yeah, I would. That's my prized possession right there, because that is my first real exposure to Sherlock Holmes,
So
and
many
I
people
recognized the character in the story to be the same character that I saw in the movie, and I kind of thirsted for more. So flash forward to when I was about 10, 11 years old, and I'm flipping through channels, and I come across, at that point, cable's A&E, which was essentially the PBS of the cable world. And they had back-to-back like Poirot and Lovejoy and Sherlock Holmes. I came across Jeremy Brett's Sherlock Holmes and was instantly captivated. And the first episode I saw was the Red-Headed League. So I happened to see, the dramatization of one of the stories with which I was most intimately familiar. And I fell in love. Then the next episode was The Final Problem. The problem is,
but that's not in the book.
no, but that wasn't in the book, and I hadn't read the rest of the stories at that point. And I had just found this TV show that I loved, and then they threw him off the Reichenbach Falls, and little 10 or 11-year-old me was terribly inconsolable. I think my parents thought I was bonkers, because I'm sitting here like weeping because I found this show with this character that I loved, and they just killed him off. Little did I know that the next week on A&E they would be airing The Empty House, and there's more stories. And so I begged my aunt to, for Christmas, to buy me a copy of the Sherlock Holmes stories. And on a bookshelf over there, I have my original copy of the Doubleday 2-book edition, which is beat to shreds and terribly loved.
As it should be, actually.
Yes, the bindings are broken. I mean, it looks awful, and I have like notes all over that I have scribbles all over, but I fell in love, and I just haven't looked back. Holmes has been a part of my life on and off, for years. There's been ebbs and flows, but it's been actually for a little bit more than the last decade. It's been pretty solid, kind of heavy immersion in the Sherlockian community.
It's interesting because I mean, it's certainly the case with me, and I know many other people, including yourself, like you just described, that first book that everybody remembers, that book, for them, that was personal to them, and many of us have managed to hang on to it. And I always find that really interesting, that whatever treasures you might have on your shelf, right there on that shelf is that banged up, battered, intrinsically insignificant yet priceless book.
Absolutely.
That turned the key for you, and that's really interesting.
Oh yeah. Now this book, came with me, or that copy came, with me to college. It came with me to Minneapolis when I lived there for 5 years. So I mean, it's been in residence in 4 different states. It's been part of my life, and even though it's only got the original those 3 stories and they're abridged, I just couldn't leave it behind. It's precious to me.
Well, I hope your brother doesn't come looking for it.
Oh, I think after almost 35 years, he's given up, and just has decided to give it to me.
Well, you mentioned Minneapolis. I think that's where I first met you.
Yes, I think it would have been the Norwegian Explorers Conference in 2013.
That's right. In fact, I actually remember the moment. I don't know if you do. I was it was, everybody gets in that night before, whatever that night is, and so it was like the next morning, and I had gotten up, and I had there's that restaurant in the hotel, the conference center hotel there that they have, and I was sitting in a booth, kind of like this, and next thing I know, I hear Peter Blau's voice going, "Mind if we join you?" And I was like, I look up, I was like, "Oh, no, not at all." And it was you. and Peter and one other person, and I can't remember who you are, but
It might have been Ray Riethmeyer, actually.
could have
I
been.
don't know. But yeah, I think it could have been Ray Riethmeyer.
Could have been. That person sat here next to me, so I wasn't paying much. I was talking to Peter and getting to meet you, and I remember that. Despite the
Yeah.
fact we'd had a long night of frivolity the night before.
As Sherlockians are wont to do at times. Now, the funny thing is that with the actually it may have been maybe not the 2013 conference then. It would have been the 2010 conference, because the 2010 conference was my first Sherlockian event ever, and that's where I met Peter Blau. So we may have met 3 years prior to or 3 years earlier than what either of us might think.
That might be it. I know
Yeah.
it was not. It was a couple back, and it happened. Those conferences happen every 3 years. So
Yeah. I think it was the 2010, because my story with the 2010 conference is kind of interesting. I registered late, as in the conference started on Friday. I arrived in Minneapolis on Friday, stayed with my friend Neil, who's actually a local author up there, a good friend of mine, and I read about it online. And I was like, well, I'm going to see if I can kind of like do like a prorate register for the conference and just attend the conference on Saturday and Sunday. And that's the day that I met Peter Blau. I remember this because Julie McCurris was doing, I think Russell Merritt couldn't make it to the conference. And so Julie was reading his paper, and it had a reference to Battleship Potemkin in it. And she made an offhand comment of, does anybody know what year this movie was made? And off the top of my head, I was like 1925, but because it was 2010 and I had my first smartphone, I had a BlackBerry, I quickly went on IMDb and looked it up. So in a room full of strangers, I wouldn't raise my hand and say something stupid. And Peter, who happened to be sitting next to me, and I had no idea who he was, nudges me after that, and he's like, I saw what you did there. We need to talk. And that's how I met Peter Blau. And then I think subsequently that's how I met you. But
that's right. That all kind of sounds familiar.
Yeah.
As you describe it. So that's a long time. We've been friends a long time, longer than
I have to admit, I was wide-eyed with wonder during that conference. So it's like so much of it is a blur. But I mean, it's like I remember so much, basically, I think from 2013 on. But those first couple of years of the first conference, I mean, that was my first Sherlockian event ever.
Well, it can be kind of overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great conference and incredibly well put together. But to be, we'll just say, to be a solo Sherlockian and then to attend a conference like that as your first social in-person event is mind-blowing. I mean, it's unfathomable. Like,
it really is.
Like this entire community of people.
Most people will start by finding another Sherlockian, and then kind of at that point join a local science. It's kind of ratchet up the ladder there, but you just jumped in the deep end.
The funny thing is that that's actually where I met my friend, the late Dick Kaplan, Richard Kaplan, who founded the Younger Stanfords,
yes,
which is the Sherlock Holmes Society in Iowa City that I now run. That's how I met Dick. I was talking to Peter Blau, and I was kind of lamenting that there's no web presence. I'm a stupid 29-year-old, attending this conference and thinking that everything should have a web presence at that point. I mean, obviously now in 2021, that's pretty true. But in 2010, very few Sherlock Holmes groups had websites.
And 1895, so
exactly. And so I was lamenting to Peter about, I couldn't find any information about any groups in Iowa City. And he points across the room and he says, you see that guy over there? I was like, yeah. He's like, that's Dick Kaplan. You need to talk to him. And that's how I met Dick. I mean, and that's how I got connected with the local Scion, is I had to drive 250 miles to Minneapolis to find the guy who lives in my backyard.
Yeah, it works out that way sometimes. It just
It does.
So tell me a little bit about your local group.
Oh, well, the younger Stanfords, we were, or rather, Dick Kaplan established the younger Stanfords in 1988. And typically we meet semi-annually. So usually or traditionally the first Monday in May and the first Monday in November, kind of following the academic calendar. Because Iowa City is a university town, the home of the University of Iowa, go Hawkeyes. We have to kind of go with the ebbs and flows of the academic calendar. And since Dick was a professor emeritus of dermatology at the University of Iowa, his life very much was informed by the academic calendar. We're a small group, a generalist group, so it doesn't matter what type of Sherlockian you are. If you're a diehard Sherlockian who likes to go to events and travel and attend things, great. If you're a very casual fan who's read a couple of the stories, also great. Everybody is welcome in the younger Stanfords. Occasionally, just because I live out in the country, and I have a 5.1 surround sound movie theater built into my backyard. I do host movie screenings for our group, which is fun. But usually our meetings are toasts, dinner, and a presentation. So it's a pretty standard Midwest Sherlockian Scion meeting.
That's I love that. I love that kind of classic. The classic science society is, I love it.
Oh yeah, there's nothing quite like it. I mean, when I first started attending younger Stanford's meetings, we met at the local library, and it was after I took over the group in 2013 that I decided to kind of reintroduce the concept of the dinner meeting. The difference, though, is that after traveling kind of across the Midwest, attending illustrious clients meetings, some of the Norwegian explorers study groups, attending some of the meetings of the notorious canary trainers from Madison, Wisconsin, as well as like the Criterion Bar in Chicago. I wanted to try to bring some of like the best of the different groups back to the younger Stanfords, because in many ways it's a very insular group. The vast majority of the membership, other than Dick Kaplan and myself and now David Harnois, had not really traveled outside of Iowa City for Sherlockiana. And so, because I have traveled and because I have attended a lot of different meetings and a lot of different types of meetings, it's kind of like, let's bring some of this stuff back. And
Yeah.
the difference, though, is that budgeting is a challenge. Nobody in the Chicago area bats an eye for a $35 to $40 dinner, whereas it's a struggle to get people to come out for about a $15 dinner in Iowa City. But
I get it. We've had
different markets.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. But I think that's a phenomenon in all, in many, not all, but probably the majority of local science societies is that there's a small group that is very active in the larger world, and then you've got this kind of wonderful local crowd that's devoted, good Sherlockians, devoted to the local club, and they're perfectly happy with that, and that's quite wonderful as well. So,
absolutely. I mean, there's no right or wrong way to be a Sherlockian.
Right, and I think that that idea of bringing back a good idea to your local group. I mean, I steal good ideas all the time for the illustrious clients, which that's my home group. And so, if you didn't know, and so that's great. Well, that's a nice segue into one thing I did want to talk to you about, and that is your your sort of, I think, pioneering work using technology to connect the larger community. For decades and decades, the vast majority of our hobby in our community, it was you either get in a car and drive somewhere, you write a letter, you call on the phone. This is pre-internet. I know that for many people who are watching this, there was a time before there was no internet. And so when, and even with the internet, I mean, there's the way we can communicate now, like we're doing right now.
Oh
This
yeah,
is,
this was not possible 20 years ago.
I'm not even sure it was possible 5 years ago, the way we're doing this now.
True, true.
Right. And so, I've sort of been admiringly observing your efforts in this, and then of course we get this pandemic, right?
Yeah.
And it's my firm belief that if this had struck 5 years ago, it might have been uh, maybe not a death blow to this hobby, but certainly would have set this hobby back decades.
I agree with that. I really do.
Right. Yeah. And so what we have here now is so the community rallied to embrace technology, and not only did it hold our, I believe it not only did it hold our community together, but it also in some ways, you know, advanced it in some ways. And so let's talk about some of the things you've been doing. I know the first thing that probably the most well-known thing is your movie screening. So talk about
Okay.
that.
So let's see. Kind of a long, we'll just say kind of long and storied history with technology. So back in 2010, when you and I first met, when I first met Peter Blau, I was lamenting that no Sherlockian group really had a web presence. Well, if you look on the Red Circle's website and you dig deep in the archive, you'll find a page where Peter actually gives me credit because it's my fault that the Red Circle has a website. So apparently, since day one, I've been kind of a pioneer in technology. So setting the stage for a moment, I'm a mental health counselor. And part of my job is to interact with clients in person. And so flashback to March of 2020, as the pandemic was striking. Here I am kind of panicking a little bit because my job is to interact with people in person. And up until that point, insurance companies, most of them were not very comfortable with embracing the idea of telehealth.
Right.
And so I'm experiencing some personal panic about my profession, my finances, I was lucky enough that the insurance companies decided to embrace telehealth. And now you're right, though. So much of the Sherlockian community is social. It's in-person interaction. Now, my first 6 weeks of COVID quarantine were originally supposed to be the first weekend, which would have been at the end of March, was supposed to be the Dayton conference. Then I was supposed to be in Toronto for the Bootmakers meeting doing a presentation. The following week, I was supposed to be in Minneapolis for the Minneapolis International Film Festival. The following week, I was supposed to be in Champaign, Illinois for Roger Ebert's Film Festival. The week thereafter would have been 140 varieties of tobacco ash, so I would have been hanging out with you in Indianapolis. And then the first weekend of May, I was supposed to be in Boston for the Speckled Band of Boston. And as an extroverted individual and a very social Sherlockian, to have my entire calendar trounced because of the pandemic. And obviously cancellations were for very good reasons, but it was a bit on the soul crushing side. And
I'm right there with you. It was, watch them fall one after another.
Oh, it hurts.
Brutal.
It genuinely hurts. It physically hurts. Just watching all of that. And so I will take ownership of the fact that I wasn't necessarily in the best place for myself. And so I was kind of like, I spent a couple of days just kind of sitting and moping and grieving the loss of these in-person events, and also trying to figure out, well, what do I love? Okay, I love movies. What can't I do? I can't go to the movie theater. But maybe I can use some of the technology to kind of bring us together and figure out how to watch a movie with friends. And it it was at the suggestion of Bob Katz, actually. He sent, he and I were chatting on Facebook, and he sent me a note. He's like, figure this out. It's like, it's a good idea, Bob. Let me get on that. And so I experimented for a couple of weeks in different formats, and I figured out that if I have a digital copy of a film and I have a professional account on Zoom, I can invite as many people as possible, so up to 100 people, and just do the share screen and watch movies together. And what we can do, just like Steve and I are, just like you and I are having this chat right now, is, chat before the movie, chat after the movie verbally, but also use the chat feature, the text chat feature, to have a running commentary throughout the movie. So there's social interaction. It's been, we'll just say mostly weekly, but not quite. For since April of last year, I've been running nearly weekly movie screenings of something of Sherlockian or Doylean nature, just to kind of give people an opportunity to connect. I felt it was imperative for people like me, people like you, people all around the world, to be able to come together and to do something together virtually when we couldn't do it in person.
Yeah,
It was absolutely necessary for my own mental health, and I think it was necessary for a lot of other people's mental health too.
I think it was too. Hey, Monica, we have to take a break because, as always, we need to get a word in from our sponsor. Okay, we're back. You mentioned that you are a professional, a mental health professional.
Yes.
And I've heard a couple of talks that you've given over the years. I know one of them was in Minnesota. We were talking about Minnesota, talking about sort of the mental health of Sherlock Holmes. And I want you to kind of tell, you don't need to, reprise your entire talk, but tell us what your thoughts about that are, kind of in a nutshell. But I also want to talk about what that says about the character.
Ah, okay. Now I like where you're going with this. So it's kind of funny how sometimes that in-person interaction kind of informs what we do in our off time. So my first BSI weekend, yeah, actually, I'm remembering this now. It was my first BSI weekend, so it would have been 2014. I enjoyed a late night at Olunni's, and I was having a conversation with Jim Cox. And I was lamenting that nobody had ever written a paper from a clinical standpoint about Sherlock Holmes's cocaine usage. That there's like Subcutaneous My Dear Watson by Jack Tracy, which is great, but it's not from a clinical perspective. It's very much everything that I've come across has been always from a lay perspective. Somebody saying, oh, he couldn't be an addict because he's functional. He couldn't be this because of that. And it's like, well, most people who are making these arguments don't know the reality of mental health. And so Jim actually says, well, why don't you do it? Duh. Okay, so I ended up basically writing a paper on exactly that. My background, even though I'm a licensed mental health counselor, my professional background is in addictions counseling. And so the DSM-5, which would be the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual of Mental Disorders, which is kind of the clinical Bible for us as mental health counselors. That's like the ones or the section that I know better than pretty much, I don't want to say anyone, but better than the vast majority of even general mental health counselors, because I've spent a decade working in the substance abuse treatment field. And so I decided to do to Sherlock Holmes essentially what I do to my clients, which is kind of maybe not with my clients when I'm doing an intake, I interview them and ask them kind of a series of structured questions. But all those structured questions kind of surround the diagnostic criteria, which would be for substance abuse disorders, 11 kind of bullet points that the American Psychiatric Association has determined qualify a person for a substance use disorder. And my job is how many, basically going through and figuring out how many a person fits in terms of diagnosis. What diagnosis do they meet if they meet a diagnosis? What severity of diagnosis, or what severity is that diagnosis? And so what I decided to do is I took the diagnostic criteria, and then I went through Bill Goodrich's The Good Old Index, just because it's always nice to have an index that is keyed to my copy of the Doubleday, and just looked up cocaine and looked at the different passages, and then looked at surrounding passages in order to kind of understand the context, and decided to kind of almost use the canon as my diagnostic interview and my evidence, and explore the diagnostic criteria. And that's a presentation I ended up giving in Minnesota in 2016, which I've entitled the 7% Evaluation. Essentially, what I wanted to do is I wanted to present a specialist's opinion upon the matter, a clinical insight into Sherlock Holmes's cocaine usage, because so many people have misunderstandings about what addiction is and what it actually looks like. It was published in the BSJ, which was great. And because it was so successful, I've had a number of people suggest and request that I look at other mental health aspects, because it's a good opportunity to educate the general populace about mental health, as well as to destigmatize mental health. A lot of people get up in arms over the idea of Sherlock Holmes as an addict because they have preconceived notions about the kind of person who has an addiction. And, well, it's a little spoiler here, but Holmes meets 8 out of the 11 diagnostic criteria for substance use disorder, cocaine use disorder severe, which
So I'm going to assume that's enough to get.
Oh yeah. We don't use the term addict. It's not. That's a lay term, a colloquial term versus a clinical term, but it's essentially the same. But I mean, that's definitely enough to get a diagnosis of the severe category, which would, if we use layman's terms, qualify someone as an addict. So if Sherlock Holmes is an addict and he is a character that we love, what does that mean about how we treat other people who struggle with addictions? What does that mean for us as fans of this character, and how we then go out into the world and interact with people who struggle with addictions?
Yeah,
Or
I mean, we'll give our literary character a break, but not the guy,
exactly. Yeah, not the guy who's struggling with alcoholism, or the guy who has an opiate addiction. So it's like we're willing to give Holmes a break because we love him, but we're not necessarily willing to give others the same love and latitude.
Really interesting. Now, what do you think the fact? This is one of the things first of all, that was really interesting to me.
Thank you.
What about but what's also interesting to me is that you can use the canon as your diagnostic interview. I mean, what does it say? What do you think it says about the this character that this character, we can do that with this character? I mean, what does it say about this character and this canon of writing?
Well, to me, what it says is that whether we're playing the game or not, so either Arthur Conan Doyle or Watson was one hell of an author. But the character of Sherlock Holmes is exceedingly multifaceted, and that's one of the reasons why we love him. Is that he's not just the regular Joe Schmo. He's got layers upon layers upon layers, and he's got some flaws, and that makes him in many ways all the more human. And one of the cool things about Holmes is that his powers of observation and deduction make him seem almost superhuman. But those flaws, those foibles, the mental health concerns that he has, makes him a little bit more relatable and brings him a little bit down to earth. One of the reasons why I love analyzing canonical characters is, because we're all familiar with them. These are the characters that we know. These are the characters that we love. And, sometimes it gives us an opportunity to look at them in a different light. It was a couple of months ago, somebody made a comment on, I think it was the Hounds listserv, because I still subscribe to that. That's been around since
That's still
the
a thing.
90s. Yeah, that's still around. Somebody made a comment about Holmes not being an addict because of those people, and I was just like, hey now. Kind of coming in and explaining that Holmes is one of those people too. Again, getting people to kind of
Mhm.
question their own assumptions about what things are. Actually, a really great example of this. There have been dozens of papers written about Watson and his gambling problem. I believe Susan Rice won the Morley Montgomery for one of the papers that she wrote on the subject. It's all over the Robert Downey Jr. movies, and it's all over Sherlockian media. Well, if we look at the diagnostic criteria, Watson doesn't qualify for problem gambling. So clinically, he may not, but we like to make the assumptions. So it gives us an opportunity sometimes to challenge the assumptions that we make about the characters, either that they are something or they're not something. And I just let the diagnostic criteria and the information from the canon be my guide. I don't twist my theories I twist my theories to suit the facts, but don't twist the facts to suit my theories.
It's so interesting that it's such a using BSM, is it 5 now? What is it? BSM?
It's in the fifth edition now.
Yeah, but using that kind of thing, as a tool, I think
Yeah.
is so fascinating. That's why I particularly was appreciative of that talk you gave in Minnesota. I remember thinking, well, this is really. I mean, we've all speculated about,
Yeah.
he takes drugs, he's got depression. Some people think he's on some kind of spectrum for Asperger's or autism or something. All those things are legitimate to speculate about. But when you bring a diagnostic tool to the table, I think that is particularly interesting. And
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing is that in each of us members of this community, and especially the Baker Street Irregulars, we all bring something to the table, and something unique. And obviously, I'm not the only person who works in mental health in the community, but I've been able to bring kind of a unique scholarly aspect to some of the presentations and some of the papers that I've written that hasn't necessarily been present before. And I feel like that's kind of my way of contributing to this community, as well as contributing to society as a whole. Just because I'm doing I'm using Sherlock Holmes as an exemplar to educate people about mental health.
well, I think we're getting close on time. Can you believe it? I think that that's a nice way to kind of circle back to the community again.
Yeah.
Um, one of the things one of the goals, we have a number of goals for this podcast, and one of them is to sort of promote the Sherlockian community. We were talking about our local friends and our local science societies,
Mhm.
about how many of them are sort of Sherlockians here, and that's
Mhm.
great. But what would you say to a Sherlockian? What would you say to your young self before you went to Minnesota? I mean, what would you say to a younger it doesn't even need to be young Sherlockian. There are Sherlockians who are middle-aged people who have always loved Sherlock Holmes, and now they've discovered that there really is a community. And I don't know, a lot of new people to the
Mhm.
community can feel intimidated. And what would you say to that person about the value of taking that plunge and kind of stepping out of your comfort zone?
Oh my, it's I mean, it opens an entire new world for you. I mean, a lot of people are content to be solo Sherlockians, and for years I was. But I mean, there's so many neat and interesting people, so many different and fascinating things that we can do, because we'll just say because and I know that you are as well, kind of one of the rare extroverts in this community. We tend to travel a little bit, and so my Sherlockian journey maybe looks a little different than other people's Sherlockian journeys. But I enjoy the aspect of driving or flying to a town to attend a dinner and meet new people and find out kind of what their traditions are within the Sherlockian community, as well as to find out about who the people are, because it really is the people that make the community. And the people are, I think people have said, come for the Sherlock Holmes, stay for the people. And this is exactly what this community is all about. Yeah, I will take ownership of how completely off the wall nuts I am. Ross Davies is, starting he's just started the Arthur Conan Doyle Society, so the ACD Society. Well, we're going to be starting a cricket team and hopefully doing an exhibition game against the Sherlock Holmes Society of London. So in the Cedar Rapids, Iowa City area, I have joined the local cricket league. And so I'm taking this as an opportunity to learn a new sport, so I can justify flying over to London and playing the Sherlock Holmes Society of London. But what's actually really neat for me is that because of something that I'm interested in the Sherlockian community, I'm now networking in my local community. And to be fair, who would have thought that there would have been a local cricket league in Cedar Rapids, Iowa? And the best part is, at least for me, is that as an American-born individual, we'll just say is that my local cricket league is very not. A lot of my teammates and the league members are immigrants from Commonwealth countries, usually India, Pakistan, or Bangladesh, and so it's giving me an opportunity to actually be a minority in my own country, which is really neat. Because as we'll just say middle-class, heterosexual white person, I'm kind of like, for lack of a better term, kind of the status quo. So it's giving me an opportunity to meet new people locally, so then I can kind of and teach them a little bit about why I'm doing, engaging in the league, teaching them about Sherlock Holmes, maybe not quite being the Johnny Appleseed that John Bennett Shaw was regarding the community, but doing kind of unique things in the name of Sherlock Holmes and Arthur Conan Doyle, and bringing forth this awareness of this community, and the fact that there are some really cool people that are involved in this community and in this hobby. And
it's true.
So it's fun.
It's the best thing, and it's the gateway to everything, really.
Oh, absolutely.
That's how I look at Sherlock Holmes. It's Sherlock Holmes and not only the literature, but the people that you meet is a gateway to everything. And
oh, absolutely. I've had the opportunity to go so many places and do so many things because of my involvement in this community, and because of the people that I know, and because people have been embracing. I have to admit, being at that time 29 years old, walking into my first Sherlockian event ever at the Norwegian Explorers Conference, feeling all intimidated by all these people who seem to know each other. I mean, it's initially kind of intimidating, but everybody was welcoming and embracing. And then there was, at the time, young Soren Eversole, who I believe is like 20 now, but he was 9, doing a little Jeremy Brett cosplay, and it was the most precious thing ever. And I was thinking, God, if this 9-year-old kid can do this, I got this in the bag.
And think about that. We, 9 to 90, right?
Exactly. And that's the best part about this, is that Soren is, he's a great kid, and it's been really fun watching him grow up, and kind of growing up in some ways in parallel in this community, just in different ways. It's I never thought that I'd have a 11-year friendship with a kid who I met who was 9.
Right? But that's how it goes. Well, Monica, we are out of time.
Well, thank you for having me, Steve.
It flies when you're having fun visiting your friends. So I want to thank you for this, and I know I'll see you sooner than later. And,
absolutely.
And but I'm also trusting that we all will. So
That is the hope, and just keep tuned to the Strangers Room on Facebook, because that's usually where I post about the movie screenings. As we exit the quarantine and kind of get back to normal life, the movie screenings will be a little fewer and far between instead of weekly, but they shall continue.
I know there's many people who are happy to hear that.
Absolutely.
Well, take care, my friend.
And you. Thank you for having me, Steve.
And we'll see you soon. And that's it for this episode of the Fortnightly Dispatch, brought to you by the Baker Street Irregulars. I just want to say thank you to everybody for your continued support. We're getting new subscribers all the time to the YouTube channel, and our viewership is really strong, and that is so nice. And I also want to thank you for your kind comments that you're posting on all the sites that we appear on. I also want to take a moment to thank a couple of people who actually sent a handwritten letter with a little gift. So this is a big thank you to Linda Hine and Beth Barnard, who sent this lovely postcard that opens up. And it had these beautiful printed postcards inside. And it's coming to us under the return address of Baker Street West. They write, "Dear Steve, we appreciate so much the Fortnightly Dispatch. It is most excellent. We hope you enjoy our postcards. Best wishes, Linda Hine and Beth Barnard." Well, Linda and Beth, I'm very grateful. Very grateful. And it's that kind of reinforcement that keeps us going here on the podcast. So I'm very grateful for that. And they're lovely, by the way. So you want to come back in 2 weeks for our next guest. It's going to be terrific as always. And until then, take care, and we'll see you then.